The laughter was the worst part, not the challenge itself. The older man stood perfectly still as the black belt fighter circled him like a shark, pointing and jeering at his weathered gi with no belt. Sunlight filtered through the dojo's high windows, casting long shadows across the worn mats where a group of special needs children had frozen mid-practice, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. What exactly are you teaching these kids, old-timer? False confidence that'll get them hurt? Jason Reed's voice cut through the silence, his black belt tight around his crisp white uniform. You don't even have a belt. You shouldn't be anywhere near these children. Robert Evans, his silver hair neatly combed, his hands weathered by decades of practice, simply adjusted the sleeve of his faded gi and spoke softly. We were just finishing up. Perhaps we could discuss this later. The taunting laugh again. There's nothing to discuss. You're a fraud, and I'm going to prove it. Jason turned to the children and their worried parents. This man has been misleading you. Tomorrow at noon, come to Reed Martial Arts Academy. I'm challenging him publicly. Then you'll see what real martial arts looks like. One of the children, a boy with Down syndrome, stepped forward. Mr. Robert isn't... Save it, kid, Jason interrupted. Your teacher here needs to answer. Or is he too scared? Robert placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. It's all right, Michael. Then to Jason. I haven't accepted a challenge in many years. Because you can't, Jason snorted, then dropped his voice to a theatrical whisper meant for everyone to hear. Look at him trembling. Pathetic. Robert wasn't trembling, but something flickered behind his eyes. Not fear, but something deeper, like ancient embers stirring after years of dormancy. Tomorrow, then, Robert said quietly, if you insist. As Jason strutted out, high-fiving his entourage, Michael looked up at Robert. Are you going to fight him? The old man straightened his posture almost imperceptibly. Sometimes, he replied, people need to see rather than hear the truth. And though none of the parents or children could explain why, something in the calm certainty of his voice made them shiver with anticipation. Robert Evans never spoke about his past. The children who came to the community center 3 times a week didn't care about credentials. They cared that this kind, patient man showed them they were capable of more than anyone had ever believed. What the world had forgotten, or perhaps never fully appreciated, was the quiet revolution Robert had started 4 decades earlier. Thomas Mitchell, now a physical therapist who occasionally volunteered at the center, was one of the few who recognized him. I can't believe it's really you, he'd whispered, the first day he'd seen Robert working with a non-verbal autistic child, guiding her through movements that seemed to unlock something within her. You're Robert Silent Wind Evans. Robert had simply smiled. That name belongs to another life. Before disappearing from the competitive circuit, Robert Evans had been a pioneer. In 1979, he developed what he called adaptive martial movement, a methodology that used martial arts principles to help children with physical and developmental challenges improve coordination, focus, and confidence. His techniques had been revolutionary, but he'd refused to patent them or commercialize his approach. The moment you start charging premium prices, he once said in a rare interview, you exclude the very people who need it most. After training Olympic athletes and world champions, Robert had walked away at the height of his fame. Rumors circulated. Some said he'd had a breakdown, others claimed a terminal illness. The truth was both simpler and more profound. I realized I was helping people who already had every advantage, he explained to Thomas. Meanwhile, children with real challenges were being told what they couldn't do instead of what they could. So Robert had liquidated his assets established a foundation that operated quietly in underserved communities and removed the coral belt that marked him as a grand master. He worked with special needs children in community centers that welcomed his volunteer services without recognizing his significance. The Evans adaptive method was now being taught in specialized centers worldwide, though few connected it to the unassuming elderly man who now lived in a modest apartment above a bookstore. "Why don't you wear your belt?" Michael had once asked him. Robert had smiled, helping the boy adjust his stance. "When you truly understand the river, you no longer need to name it." For years, Robert had maintained this quiet existence, finding fulfillment in the progress of children whom society often overlooked. Until yesterday, when Jason Reed's challenge had pierced the carefully constructed cocoon of his retirement. That night, after the confrontation, Robert sat cross-legged in his small apartment, eyes closed, breath even. The framed photograph on his sparse bookshelf, the only one, showed a much younger Robert surrounded by a team of diverse athletes, Olympic medals gleaming around their necks. Behind glass, tucked away, the faded newspaper headline read, "Evans' revolutionary training methods lead to historic medal sweep." He opened his eyes and looked at his hands. They had aged, certainly, mapped with veins and spotted with time, but as he flexed them slowly, he knew they remembered everything. The whispers started around 10 p.m. Jason Reed was having a protein shake at the juice bar next to his academy when his senior instructor, Marcus, approached with an unusual expression. "You might want to reconsider that challenge," Marcus said quietly. Jason laughed. "Why? You've seen him. He's ancient." "I made some calls," Marcus continued. "That old man doesn't wear a belt because he doesn't need one. I think he might be Robert Evans." The name triggered a distant memory from Jason's training. Evans? The mythical guy. That's impossible. He'd be dead by now. "He's very much alive. My old master trained with him in the 70s. Jason's confidence wavered momentarily, but his ego quickly reasserted control. "Even if it is him, he's what, almost 70 now? Physics doesn't lie. Age wins eventually." But that night, Jason found himself watching grainy YouTube videos of a younger Robert Evans moving with impossible fluidity, defeating opponents half his age in exhibitions that seemed more like physics lessons than fights. In one clip, Evans stood motionless as 5 attackers charged him, only to find themselves on the ground moments later, unsure how they'd gotten there. Across town, at Westside Community Center, the parents of Robert's students were gathering. Maria Sanchez, whose daughter Lucia had made remarkable progress under Robert's guidance despite her cerebral palsy, paced anxiously. "We should cancel tomorrow," Thomas Mitchell suggested. "This isn't what Robert would want." "But you don't understand what he's done for our children," Maria responded. "My Lucia spoke her first full sentence after 3 months with him, when the doctors had told me she might never speak." Similar stories emerged around the room. Tales of breakthroughs, of small miracles that had occurred under Robert's patient guidance. Yet none of them had known his full history until tonight, when Thomas had finally explained who had been teaching their children all along. The man literally wrote the foundational paper on proprioceptive training for asymmetrical development, Thomas explained. He turned down millions to keep his methods accessible. Meanwhile, Robert walked alone through the park, watching the moon's reflection shimmer across the small pond. A jogger passed, giving the old man in the worn jacket a curious glance, but seeing nothing remarkable. This was what Robert had wanted for so long. Anonymity, peace, the freedom to help without expectations or accolades. Tomorrow would change that. The thought saddened him more than the prospect of the challenge itself. At Reed Martial Arts Academy, Jason finally turned off his computer at 2 a.m. His confidence artificially restored by rationalization. Even Legend's age, he told himself, ignoring the unsettled feeling in his stomach. But as both men fell asleep on opposite sides of town, it was Robert who slept peacefully, while Jason's dreams were haunted by the serene smile of an old man who seemed to know something he didn't. By 11:30 a.m., Reed Martial Arts Academy was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread overnight. Local competitors, former students, and curious onlookers squeezed in alongside parents and children. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Jason Reed had arranged a dramatic entrance for himself. Smoke machines, entrance music, a spotlight following him as he bounded onto the mats in a brand new GI, his black belt prominently displayed. He played to the crowd, shadowboxing and demonstrating flashy kicks that drew applause from his supporters. At precisely noon, the main doors opened. The smoke machines and music fell silent. Robert Evans entered alone, wearing the same simple white GI without a belt. He walked quietly to the edge of the mat, removed his shoes, and bowed before stepping onto the training surface. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jason's voice boomed through the microphone. "Today, I'm exposing a fraud who's been misleading vulnerable children and their families." But something strange was happening. As Robert moved through the crowd, recognition dawned on the faces of the older martial artists present. Whispers rippled through the room. "It can't be. That's Evans." Silent wind. A distinguished older man in the front row stood up shakily. Robert Evans, is it really you?" The room fell silent. Jason's confident smile faltered. "Hello, Master Tanaka," Robert said softly. "It's been a long time." The elderly Japanese man who had risen was Hiroshi Tanaka, Jason's own grandmaster and founder of their entire regional association. "This man," Master Tanaka announced, his voice trembling with emotion, "was my teacher." The crowd gasped. Jason froze, microphone halfway to his mouth. "Would you do us the honor," Master Tanaka continued, "of wearing your proper rank today?" For the first time, Robert hesitated. Then, with a slight nod, he accepted a faded coral belt from Master Tanaka's outstretched hands. The highest rank possible, a level Jason had never even seen in person. "I didn't come to embarrass anyone," Robert said, addressing not Tanaka, but Jason directly. "I came because these children deserve respect." Michael, the boy with Down syndrome, suddenly broke free from his mother and ran to Robert's side. "Mr. Robert taught me to stand up," he announced to the crowd, "even when I fall down." One by one, other children joined him. Lucia with her cerebral palsy walker, Dev with his autism sensory headphones, Zoe with her prosthetic leg. Their parents followed, forming a protective semicircle around the man who had changed their lives. "Maybe now is a good time to subscribe to our channel," Robert whispered to Michael with a gentle smile, "so you never miss stories like this one." The boy nodded enthusiastically before returning to the group. Jason stood frozen, the full weight of his mistake crushing down on him. This wasn't just an old man, this was living history. "The challenge still stands," Jason finally said, trying to salvage his pride. "Unless you're afraid," Robert sighed, tying the coral belt around his waist. It looked both foreign and familiar on him, like an old friend he hadn't expected to see again. "Very well," he said. "Shall we begin?" The first attack came predictably, a lightning-fast jab followed by a roundhouse kick, techniques that had won Jason regional championships 3 years running. Robert wasn't where the strikes should have landed. He simply wasn't there. Jason pivoted, confusion flickering across his face. The old man stood slightly to his left, having moved just enough to let the attacks pass harmlessly by. "Try again," Robert said calmly. Again and again, Jason attacked with increasingly complex combinations. Each time, Robert neutralized them with minimal movement, his breathing never changing, his face serene. He wasn't fighting back, he was teaching. The crowd watched in stunned silence. This wasn't combat, it was a masterclass. "Stop dodging and fight," Jason finally shouted, frustration breaking his composure. "If you insist," Robert replied softly. What happened next occurred so quickly that many would later disagree about the sequence of events. Robert moved forward, not with aggression, but with purpose. 3 precise points of contact, a subtle shift in balance. Jason found himself inexplicably on his back, looking up at the ceiling, uncertain how he'd gotten there. "The first principle," Robert said loud enough for everyone to hear, "is that true strength comes from understanding, not domination." He extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Jason took it, allowing the older man to help him up. "Again," Robert said. It wasn't a challenge, but an invitation. For the next 15 minutes, Robert transformed the confrontation into an impromptu seminar. With each exchange, he highlighted principles rather than techniques, speaking calmly as he redirected Jason's increasingly earnest efforts. "Notice how tension becomes your enemy," he explained, after one particularly frustrated attack left Jason off balance. "The children I work with understand this instinctively. They can't rely on strength, so they must find harmony." Gradually, Jason's face changed from frustration to concentration, and finally, to dawning comprehension. He wasn't being humiliated, he was being offered something precious. By the session's end, Jason was covered in sweat, while Robert had barely changed his breathing. Yet somehow Jason stood straighter, moved more efficiently than when they'd begun. "I think that's enough for today," Robert said, untying the coral belt and folding it carefully. The crowd erupted in applause, not for a victor, but for a demonstration of mastery that transcended competition. I don't understand," Jason said privately as the crowd began to disperse. "Why did you hide who you were?" Robert smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "The moment you become attached to being something, you lose the freedom to simply be." He gestured toward the children who had been watching, wide-eyed from the sidelines. "They don't care about my titles or history. They care that I see them, truly see them, when most of the world looks away." Jason glanced at the expensive signage of his academy, the trophies lining the walls, the promotional banners featuring his image. For the first time, he wondered what all of it was really worth. "Would you?" Jason hesitated, humility still an unfamiliar garment. "Would you consider teaching here sometimes? We could establish a program for special needs children. No charge." Robert considered this, his weathered face thoughtful. "Not here," he finally said, "but I would welcome your help at the community center. The children could benefit from your energy and skill." It was more than a compromise. It was an invitation to transformation. 3 months after that fateful challenge, the community center's small dojo had been renovated. New mats, donated equipment, and a freshly painted sign. Evans Reed Adaptive Martial Arts Center. Jason now spent every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon helping Robert with the growing number of special needs children who came to learn. His own academy still thrived, but something fundamental had shifted in his teaching philosophy. Before each class, Jason told his regular students, "Ask yourself, am I training to defeat others or to master myself?" The story of the challenge had spread throughout the martial arts community, reviving interest in Robert's pioneering methods. Offers flooded in. Book deals, documentary requests, speaking engagements, all of which he politely declined. The lesson was never about me, Robert explained when Jason questioned this decision. It was about seeing beyond appearances to the truth beneath. On a warm spring afternoon, as they watched Lucia demonstrate a complex form she'd been practicing for weeks, Jason voiced the question that had lingered since their first encounter. "Weren't you angry when I challenged you? When I disrespected you in front of the children?" Robert considered this, watching the determined girl move through her sequence despite her cerebral palsy. "There was a time when I might have been," he admitted. "But anger is a tax we pay on someone else's mistakes. I chose long ago to stop paying it." He turned to face Jason fully. "We're all challenged in life, though rarely in ways we expect. The real question is, what do those challenges reveal about us?" For many of the children, Robert and Jason's story had become almost mythical. The tale of an old master and a proud fighter who became unexpected allies. But for the two men, it represented something more profound, a reminder that wisdom often comes disguised as humility, and that strength reveals itself most powerfully in gentleness. The greatest victory, Robert often told his students, is the one that needs no explanation, requires no trophy, and changes both winner and loser for the better. As we go through life wearing our various belts, our credentials, achievements, and status symbols, perhaps we might remember that true mastery often walks quietly among us, unannounced and unadorned. The elderly person you dismiss, the quiet colleague you overlook, the unassuming stranger you judge too quickly. Any of them might hold wisdom that could transform your understanding if only you have eyes to see beyond appearances. The real power of Robert's story wasn't that he defeated a younger challenger. It was that he turned a moment of potential humiliation into an opportunity for shared growth. In doing so, he demonstrated the highest form of mastery, not just of martial arts, but of being human.